Today is September 30th?
Yep.
And the Commander Rules Committee has just announced that they are going to pass control back to Wizards. Today we wanted to talk to you about why that's a bad thing, and kind of the steps leading up to this and where we think it's going next.
Yeah, so if you're coming into this, you don't know what's going on. Commander is a format of Magic the Gathering that was made up by the community a long time ago, and
Elder Dragon Highlander.
Yeah, exactly. And to solve the issue of like not having any real consistency in rules and it being playground, sort of myth and legend, there was a rules committee created. It was a third party from Wizards of the Coast. They also created a Commander advisory group that, when combined, were supposed to make a rule set for the game, including a ban list of cards, to prioritize, format health and playability above everything else.
The thing is, and this being a drastic oversimplification of the landscape,
yeah,
there are so many cards in Magic's history that can be problems, as well as so many cards that are no longer problems, that there was always a Rule Zero conversation to be had. Drew,
yeah.
What's Rule Zero?
The idea of Rule Zero is that the table that you're sitting at has a sort of agreed upon idea that everyone is there to have a good time, and you have an understanding of like the power level that your deck and your competitors are playing at, just so that you and the people around you can enjoy playing Commander together, and that it's not going to be like a one-sided stop fest. And the Rules Committee sort of stood as this monolith to say, like, if you're not going to have a Rule Zero, these are the things that are completely unhealthy and are not viable to run if you are expected to have a good game of Commander. Good game.
Right.
So the story goes that very recently the Rules Committee banned 4 cards: Dockside Extortionist, Nadu, Mana Crypt, and Jeweled Lotus. And after that happened, a bunch of shit started falling sideways. The Magic the Gathering economy went crazy, which, wow, great. But mostly the community was upset because these cards that are, to some people staples and were printed specifically for the Commander format are being banned.
And advertised.
And advertised for the Commander format are starting to be banned.
Ultimately, there were a lot of people who took this so negatively that they started levying threats against the people on the Rules Committee, to the point where they ultimately said, we can't do this anymore, we pass it back to Wizards.
I think that if you walk away from this video with anything, how could you, as someone who enjoys Commander, be so vile? The amount at which the very small but loud minority of people have created such a bad environment, it feels really bad. It feels like I feel sorry that I'm participating in this with just having played Commander.
Let me color this in a slightly different light. I'm honestly a little embarrassed to call myself a Magic player when I know there are people who are being seen by the larger internet wide that are doing these kinds of truly awful human behaviors. I will say I understand where a lot of them come from. If I was putting my livelihood in cardboard under the rule of Hasbro and shock, it didn't go well for me, which I think is an assumption already. I get why I might feel distressed and I might want to lash out. But the thing you have to remember is that no amount of the Rules Committee saying you can play a card doesn't mean you can't play a card if there's a Rule Zero conversation to be had.
Everything going unsaid, one, to the people who are on the Rules Committee, we wish you nothing but peace. We hope that you are not distressed by any of this.
Ultimately, I do understand respecting the ban list in my home games and even the games we play here professionally, but off camera, right? Sometimes people say, hey, I would really like to play my Dockside Extortionist. That's the new conversation we had.
Yeah.
And I'll be like, that's fine. I will just counterspell it. We'll move on and laugh. It's a good time.
Moving away from the idea of like, how could the Magic community be so rude and, making sure that the Rules Committee is, there for a reason. Let's talk about the bans that they made and talk about whether we like or dislike them, and maybe even talk about the ban list as a whole, because this is sort of a transformative time in Magic's history.
I've been doing that nonstop. Yeah.
I think that it's worth bringing up. So let's start with what's most recent, and then we can work backwards.
Okay.
Of the 4 cards, Dockside, Nadu, Mana Crypt, and Jeweled Lotus, how do you feel about the bans, like individually or as a group?
Personally, I don't even play Sol Ring. I just don't do it. And I think that's insane to say. And it is, But the reason I don't do it is because when there are one-sided fast mana starts, the table then becomes responsible for putting that person in a locker together.
Yes.
And I think that that is definitely a true experience for Commander to have. I just don't like doing that. So the problem is, if I don't play Sol Ring and my opponents play Sol Ring, then I am now behind,
Yep.
and the table has to adjust. So no matter what, it's a pacing thing. But the overall reason why I personally liked a lot of the bans is because there is this thing that's happening in Commander, especially recently, where as cards are getting more and more strong, a good example, there's an instant in Dustmore, and it's 1 mana white kill a creature.
Yep.
You put that on Swords to Plowshare, you put that on Path to Exile. All of a sudden, you look back over the history of your Commander decks, all of your decks are the same.
Yeah.
They're exactly the same. You're playing Sol Ring, you're playing Jeweled Lotus, you're playing Dockside if it's red, you're playing Ephemerate if it's white, you're playing...
You're playing Rhystic Study,
you're playing Rhystic Study.
Smothering Tithe, you're playing all of them.
So I'm not saying these bans will fix that. I'm just saying I try to really avoid these anyway because the decks don't feel fun to me.
So, I don't know if you know this, the Rules Committee talked, or at least some of the members said that they specifically wanted to target fast mana because there was an agreed upon idea that fast mana is the one thing that sort of causes the most amount of games to be unpleasant to play in, which I can understand.
Sure.
That being said, personally, I think that the bans are kind of silly. I think that Dockside is going to still be in every single deck, and if people want to play Mana Crypt, they can, but if it's one guy playing Mana Crypt at a table of precons, that person will... The same thing will happen to them that has happened in all of Magic history. They will go without opponents. They will sit at the table alone until they find a deck that doesn't have Mana Crypt that they can play equally, or until their friends catch up to their level of, you know, either investment or proxying.
It's not just like their whole friends catching up. In a perfect world, a Commander playgroup will correct for itself. I want to talk about the cards on the ban list that are silly, in my opinion.
Oh yeah.
Because before the cameras came on, you reminded me that you have experience in game development, and we were talking about archetypes and like play patterns. I feel like those things can easily be covered in like a Commander group's ability to self-govern, but I was showing you one of my favorite cards, Biorhythm, which is an 8 mana green sorcery with some crazy eyes, and it says every player's life total becomes the number of creatures they control. Drew, you brought up a great point about what is an expectation for deck building after that.
Yeah, the idea that there's an expectation that every deck should run creatures in it. And it's not just for that card specifically, but if you see a green deck, let's say Biorhythm is unbanned, and you think every green deck has to run Biorhythm, sometimes it's just an instant win. Well, you counter that by running creatures.
Yeah, it's crazy to look at that spell and think, okay, if my opponents don't run creatures, they're going to die. But if they're not running creatures, surely they're running stack interaction. And if they're not running stack interaction...
Or creatures,
then surely they're running like a combo that can just win faster than an 8 mana green sorcery.
And if they're not doing any of these things...
Then what are they doing?
Are they playing Commander? Why should they be mad? I think wholesale, if you want to get mad at the Rules Committee, well, guess what? I am a Rules Committee as I sit at the table and I play the cards that I want to and don't want to play.
Yeah, we
and
rule.
Ryan is the Rules Committee,
We rule.
and you're part of the Rules Committee, but it's at your table.
I think the one thing I did want to talk about, other than kind of the state of the bans and where we're at, is what does it mean that there's no third party other than Wizards that is governing the format?
Yeah, this is the really bad part, guys, because people who don't think about when they complain also don't realize that a third party means that the person who prints the paper cards that cost money get to decide which ones are good and which ones are bad and which ones get played.
When I started playing Magic, Standard was a format that you would play a powerful deck that was released at the time with 4 of the most expensive cards, and it would rotate every 3 months. And you'd have to buy new cards, and that's ultimately why I think Commander rose to such popularity, is you can just play your cards.
Yep.
But the thing is, if the committee is now passing their rules, governance on to Wizards, and Wizards decides, I'm not saying that they're going to, I don't have any information as a content creator.
There's no way to know.
There's no way to know, this is just all speculation. If they decide to start banning cards and essentially create a standard rotation in Commander, we're back to buying cards again. And the thing is, at that point, I'm gonna just still play the cards that are Commander with that I want.
Yep.
So my point is, a third party that was standing in the way to kind of not only just give the community a voice, but also temper Wizards' expectation was a good thing, but no amount of that should ever amount to the vile things like Drew was saying.
It was completely unnecessary, and if there's one thing that you take away, there's no reason to behave like how certain people behaved online. And the Rules Committee deserves better than that just because they are humans.
True. And I hope that our third-party concerns don't become a reality. It's very possible that they don't. I know that Wizards has generally been turning over a new leaf. But that remains to be seen. So I hope that things will go well. But remember that this is a game made by Commander players to be played with Commander players.
Yep. Hey, and here's some financial advice.
Oh.
Don't invest your life savings in cardboard cards that can be banned at an instant without any say. There is no regulation of the economy of Magic cards. If you want to do that, fine. But you are just gambling. I don't want to I hear so many people being like, oh no, my investment. It's not an investment. It would be like me buying all the rice in Florida and saying, guys, I made a really big investment in rice. Guess what? They're just gonna ship more. Okay?
Ultimately, this game is tied to Wizards of the Coast, which is tied to Hasbro, and Hasbro has a duty to make money. That is what they do.
And they could learn a lot from another property that Hasbro handles, which is D&D. They have Unearthed Arcana, which is test material that they send out, and if it doesn't pass a test material, then they retract that thing. So maybe they test a few bands like these 4, and they play a few games, and they say, or not even a few games, hundreds of games, and they say, did this help, or did this not really have the effect that we wanted? And then decide after that point.
There's a bunch of ways they could have, I think, handled better. Tolarian Community College did a fantastic video about whether they could signal bans coming up and the ways that they could handle it. So definitely go watch that. That has a much better explanation of the how, the what, and the why, as opposed to the points we were making here as well.
Guys, number one thing, just be kind first. And if you're upset, just lean on being kind first. And then figure out your upset feelings later.
All right, well, we'll catch you guys later, and thanks for listening to us. Yeah.
Don't make people sad.
Yeah, don't make people
Don't
sad.
make us sad.
The only people that can be sad in Magic are the people who get their spells countered.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.